Bjørnstjerne Martinius Bjørnson, a name so hard to pronounce nobody will dare to correct your incorrection, was the third recipient of the Nobel Prize. He was a poet, dramatist, novelist, journalist, editor, public speaker, theater director, and is generally known, along with Henrik Ibsen, Alexander Kielland, and Jonas Lie, as one of the four great ones of 19th century Norwegian literature. Bjørnson was born in 1832 and grew up in a small farming community of Romsdalen, which later became the scene of his country novels. He sought to stimulate national pride in Norway's history and to present ideals. After his breakthrough novel, Svendon Solbakken, he was able to support himself as a writer. In 1858, he married the actress Caroline Reimers and also became the editor of the Bergenposten. Partly because of this paper, the conservative representatives were defeated in 1859, and the Liberal Party was formed a short time later. Later in life, he came to think of himself as a socialist, working on behalf of peace and international understanding, though his reputation were largely diminished in comparison to that of Ibsen. He was awarded the prize as a tribute to his noble, magnificent, and versatile poetry, which has always been distinguished by both the freshness of its inspiration and the rare purity of its spirit. A Day of Sunshine. It was such a lovely sunshine day, the house in the yard couldn't hold me. I roved to the woods, on my back I lay, in cradle of fancy rolled me. But there were ants and knots that bite, the horsefly was keen, the wasps showed fight. Dear me, don't you want to be out in this fine weather, said Mother, who sat on the steps and sang. It was such a lovely sunshine day, the house in the yard couldn't hold me. A meadow I found, on my back I lay, and sang what my spirit told me. Then snakes came crawling, a phantom long, to bask in the sun, I fled with my song. In such blessed weather we can go barefoot, said Mother, as she pulled off her stockings. It was such a lovely sunshine day, the house in the yard couldn't hold me. I loosened the boats, on my back I lay, while blithely the current bowed me. But hot grew the sun, and peeled my nose. Enough was enough, and to land I chose. Now these are just the days to make hay in, said Mother, as she stuck the rake in it. It was such a lovely sunshine day, the house in the yard couldn't hold me. I climbed up a tree, oh what bliss to play, as cooling the breeze consoled me. But worms soon fell on my neck by chance, and jumping I cried, tea is a devil's own dance. Yes, if the cows aren't sleek and shiny today, they'll never be so, said Mother, gazing up the hillside. It was such a lovely sunshine day, the house in the yard couldn't hold me. I dashed to the waterfall's endless play, there only could peace enfold me. The shining sun saw me drown and die, if he made this ditty, 'T was surely not I. 3 more such sunshine days, and everything will be in, said Mother, and went to make my bed. Synnøve Solbakken. Chapter 1. In a large valley, it often happens that there is a high spot, open on every side, which the sun paints with his pencils from early dawn until twilight has faded away. And they who live near the foot of the mountains and seldomer get the sun called this spot a solbakke. The person of whom this story tells lived in such a spot as this, and from it the Gard took its name. There the snow was last to cover the ground in the autumn, and there it first melted in the spring. The owners of the Gard were Hoggians, and were called readers because they read the Bible more diligently than other people. The man's name was Guttorm, and his wife's Karen. Their first child was a son, but death took him from them, and for 3 years they never went on the east side of the church. At the end of this time, a girl was given to them, whom they named after the boy. His name had been Severt, and she was christened Sinov, as they could not find anything near her. But the mother called her Sinove, because she had a habit, as long as the child was small, of adding mind to the name, and so this seemed to come easier. However this might be, as the girl grew up, everyone called her Sinove, as her mother did, and most people said that, in the memory of man, there had not been in the parish so fair a girl as Sinove Sobakin. She was not many years old before they took her in with them to church every Sunday. They were service. Although at first Sinove knew no better than to think the priest was standing there scolding at the slave Bent, whom she saw sitting right down below the pulpit. Her father, however, wanted her to go with them, to form the habit, he said, and his mother wished it too, because no one knew how the child would be taken care of at home while they were gone. If there chanced to be a lamb, a kid, or some little pig on the guard that did not thrive, or a cow that anything was the matter with, it was always given over into Sinove's possession, and the mother seemed to feel sure that from that moment it did well. The father did not quite believe this to be the cause, but after all it did not matter which of them owned the beasts, so that these only prospered. On the opposite side of the valley, and close to the foot of a high mountain, there was a guard named Granliden, so called because it lay in the midst of a great spruce forest, the only one for many miles around. The owner's great-grandfather had been among those who lay in waiting for the Russians in Holstein, and from that expedition he had brought home in his knapsack many foreign and strange-looking seeds. These he planted round about his house. But in the course of time, one kind after another had died out. Meanwhile, some spruce cones, which, oddly enough, had been mixed in with the rest, had produced a dense forest, which now shaded the house on every side. The Holstein soldier's name had been Thorbjorn, after his grandfather, that of his eldest son Samund, after his father, and thus the owners of the guard had alternatively been named Thorbjorn and Samund, from time out of mind. But it was said that only every other man at Granliden had good luck, and it was not he who bore the name Thorbjorn. The present owner, Samund, had thought the matter over from various points of view when his first son was born, but scarcely liked to break the family custom, and so called him Thorbjorn. He pondered much upon whether the boy might not be so brought up that he would escape the fate's gossip that laid in his way. He was not altogether sure, but he thought he detected a willful disposition in the boy. "That shall be plucked out," said he to the mother. And when Thorbjorn was only 3 years old, the father would sometimes sit with the switch in his hand and compel him to carry all the sticks of firewood back to their place, to pick up the cup he had thrown down, to stroke the cat he had pinched. But the mother preferred to leave the room when the father was in this mood. Samund was surprised to find that the older the boy grew, the more there was to correct in him, and this in spite of the fact that he was dealt with more and more strictly. He sent him early to reading, and took him out to the fields with him in order to have an eye upon him. The mother had a large house and small children. She could do no more than caress and admonish him every morning while she was dressing him, and talk gently with the father when Sabbaths brought them together. But Thorbjorn, when he got a whipping because A.B. spelled A.B. and not B.A., and because he was not allowed to administer the rod to little Ingrid, as his father did to him, thought, It is strange that I must have such a hard time, while all my little brothers and sisters have everything so nice. As he passed most of his time with his father, and did not dare say much to him, he talked little, but thought the more. Once, though, while they were hauling in the wet hay, the words escaped him. "Why is all the hay dry, and in over there at Solbakken, while here it is still wet?" "Because they have the sun oftener than we." This was the first time he had noticed that the bright sunshine over there, which he so many times had sat and looked at with pleasure, was something that he was shut out from. After that day, his eye fell oftener on the Solbakken than before. "Do not sit gaping there," said his father, and gave him a push. "Over here we have to drudge all we can, both old and young, if we are to get anything housed." Simon changed to servant boy when Thorbjørn was about 7 or 8. Asklak was the name of the new servant, and he had already been about a good deal, though he was yet a mere boy. The evening he came, Thorbjørn had gone to bed, but the next day, as he sat reading, the door was pushed open with a kick, the like of which he had never heard before. It was Aslak, who came rushing in with a large armful of wood, and flung it down with such force that the sticks flew in every direction. Then he jumped up and down to stamp the snow off of him, and with every jump he exclaimed, "It is cold," said the troll bride, as she sat in ice up to her waist. The father was not in, but the mother swept together the snow and carried it out, without a word. "What are you staring at?" said Asklak to Thorbjørn. "Not at anything," said the latter, for he was frightened. "Have you seen the rooster you have in the back of your book there?" "Yes." "He has lots of hens around him when the book is shut. Have you seen that?" "No." "Well, then look." The boy did so. "You are a dunce," said Asklak to him. But from that moment no one had the power over him that Asklak did. "You do not know anything," said Asklak one day to Thorbjørn, who was trotting after him, as usual, to watch what he was doing. "Yes, I do. I know as far as the 4th past in my catechism." "Pooh! You have not even heard of the troll who danced with the girl until the sun rose, and then burst like a calf that has been eating sour milk." In all his days, Thorbjørn had never heard anyone display so much knowledge at once. "Where was that?" he asked. "Where? Why, it was over there at Solbakken." Thorbjørn stared. "Did you ever hear of the man who sold himself to the devil for a pair of old boots?" Thorbjørn forgot to answer, so astonished was he. "I suppose you are thinking of where that was, hey? It was also over there at Solbakken, right down in that brook which you see. Lord help us, your religious knowledge does not amount to much," added he. "I fancy you have not even heard of Kari, with the wooden petticoat." No, Thorbjørn had not heard of anything. And while Asklak was working fast, he was telling still faster. It was about Kari with the wooden petticoat, about the mill that ground salt at the bottom of the sea, about the devil with the wooden shoes, about the troll that got his beard caught in the branch of a tree, about the 7 green maidens who pulled the hair out of Peter Hunter's leg while he slept and could not possibly awaken, and it all took place over there at Solbakken. "What in the name of heaven ails the boy?" said his mother the next day. "He has been on his knees at the bench yonder, looking over at Solbakken ever since it was light." "Yes, he keeps very busy today," said the father, who lay taking his rest the long Sunday. "Oh, folks say that he has captured Synnøve Solbakken," Aslak was saying. "But folks say so many strange things," added he. Thorbjørn didn't exactly understand him, but nevertheless his whole face grew fiery red. When Aslak commented on this, He crept down from the bench, took his catechism, and seated himself to read. "Yes, you may as well console yourself with the word of God," said Aslak. "You will never get her, anyway." When the week was so far advanced that he thought they had forgotten this, he asked his mother, quite softly, for he felt bashful about it, "Say, who is Synnöve Solbakken?" "She is the little girl who will one day own Solbakken." "Has she, then, not a wooden petticoat?" The mother looked at him in surprise. "What is it that you say?" said she. He felt that he must have said something stupid, and was silent. "A prettier child had never been seen than she is," added the mother, "and that is her reward from the Lord, because she is always kind and good, and is an industrious reader." Now he knew that, too. One day, when Simon had been out in the field with Aslak, he said in the evening to Thorbjørn, "You must not go with Aslak any more." But Thorbjørn gave little heed to this, so after a while the order came, "If you are found with him any more, it will not be well for you." Then Thorbjørn stole after Aslak, when the father did not see him. Simon surprised him, though, one day, when they sat talking together. Then Thorbjørn got a thrashing, and was told to go in. But afterward Thorbjørn watched his chance to be with Aslak when his father was not at home. One Sunday, while the father was at church, Thorbjørn got his hands into mischief at home. Aslak and he were throwing snowballs at each other. "Oh, stop! You are choking me," begged Thorbjørn. "Let us throw together at something else." Aslak was ready at once, and so they threw first at the slender spruce over by the storehouse, then at the storehouse door, and finally at the storehouse window. "Not at the window itself," said Aslak, "but at the frame around it." Meanwhile, Thorbjørn hit the window pane and turned pale. "Pooh, who will know it? Try it again." He did so, but hit another. "Now I will not throw any more," said he. At that moment, his eldest sister, little Ingrid, came out. "Throw at her, Thorbjørn." Thorbjørn did so immediately. The girl cried, and the mother came out. She bade him stop. "Throw! Throw!" whispered Aslak. Thorbjørn was hot and excited. He did so. "Why, you must be losing your senses," said the mother, and rushed towards them. He ran before, she after, all round the grounds. She caught Thorbjørn at last in a snowdrift, and began to give him a good drubbing. "I will strike back again, I will," said he. "That is the way they do here." The mother ceased in surprise, and looked at him. "That someone else has taught you," she then said, and taking him silently by the hand, led him in. She spoke not another word to him, but kindly cared for his little brothers and sisters, and told them their father would now soon come home from church. Then it began to grow pretty hot in the room. Aslak asked leave to visit a relative. He got it at once, but Thorbjørn felt much smaller when Aslak was gone. He had a terrible pain in his stomach, and his hands were so clammy that they made his book moist when he took hold of it. If only his mother would not say anything to his father when he came home. But Thorbjørn could not bring himself to ask it. Everything his eye fell on kept exchanging looks, and the clock said, "Spanking, spanking, spanking, spanking." He had to get up to the window and looked over at Solbakken. It alone, all covered with snow, lay quiet and sparkling in the sunshine, just as usual. The house stood and laughed out of all the window panes, and there was surely not one of them broken. The smoke rose with such tremendous joy from the chimney that he judged that over there, too, they were getting dinner for the church people. No doubt Synnöve was watching for her father. It was not to have a whipping when he got home. Thorbjørn did not know what to do with himself, and all at once became so affectionate to his sisters that there was no end to it. To Ingrid he was so good that he gave her a bright button he had received from Aslak. She put her arms around his neck, and he put his arms about hers, saying, Dear little Ingrid mine, are you angry with me? No, little Thorbjorn, you may throw as much snow at me as you like. But there was someone stamping the snow off in the hall. Yes, sure enough, it was the father. He appeared to be in good humor, and that made the matter still worse. Well, said he, looking around, and it was astonishing that the clock did not tumble down. The mother put the dinner on the table. How have things been going here? Asked the father, as he seated himself and took up his spoon. Thorbjorn looked at his mother until the tears came into his eyes. Oh, well, said she, with incredible slowness. And she meant to say more. That he plainly saw. I gave Aslak permission to go out, said she. She did not do it this time, thought Thorbjorn. He began to play with Ingrid, as though he were thinking of nothing else in the world. The father had never taken so long to eat his dinner, and Thorbjorn set to work, at last, to count every bite. But when he came to the fourth, he wanted to see how many he could count between the fourth and the fifth, and then he lost track of it. Finally, the father rose and went out. The window panes, kept ringing in his ears, and he looked around to see whether those in the room were whole. Yes, they were all whole, but now his mother also went out. Thorbjorn took little Ingrid in his lap, and said, so gently that she stared at him in amazement, Come, let us two play the golden princess in the meadow. That she would like to do, and so he sang while his legs trembled under him. Little blossom, meadow blossom, hearken now to me, if you will be my sweetheart, so true. A velvet cloak I'll give to you, adorned with gold and pearls untold. Diddly, doodly, diddo, the sun now shines on the meadow. Then she answered, Gold princess, jewel princess, hearken now to me. I'll never be your sweetheart so true. I'll have no velvet cloak from you, adorned with gold and pearls untold. Diddly, doodly, diddo, the sun now shines on the meadow. But just as his game was well underway, his father came in and fixed knowing eyes on him. Thorbjorn drew Ingrid closer up in his lap, did not fall from his chair. The father turned away, said nothing. Half an hour passed. He had not yet said anything, and Thorbjorn was almost to be happy, but did not dare. He knew not what to think when the father himself helped to undress him. He began to gradually tremble again. Then his father patted him on the head and stroked his cheek. This he had not done as far back as the boy could remember, and therefore Thorbjorn grew so warm about his heart and over his whole body that fear melted off him like ice beneath the sunbeam. He did not know how he got into bed, and as he could take neither to singing nor shouting, he folded his hands, said Our Father 6 times, forwards and backwards, quite softly, and felt, as he fell asleep, that there was no one on God's green earth he loved so dearly as his father. The next day he awakened in a terrible fright, because he could not scream, for he was now to have a thrashing, after all. When he opened his eyes, he became aware, to his great relief, that he had only dreamed it, but soon also became aware that someone else was just about to have a thrashing, and that was Aslak. Seaman was pacing the floor, and Thorbjorn knew well that step. The rather short but square-built man looked now and then from under his bushy brows in such a way at Aslak that the latter felt plainly what was in the wind. Aslak was perched on the top of a great barrel, from the side of which his legs now dangled, now were drawn up. As usual, he had his hands in his pockets, and his cap drawn down lightly on his head, so that the matted locks of thick black hair protruded from under the forepiece. The little crooked mouth was more crooked than ever. He held his own head slightly aslant, and looked sideways at Seaman from beneath his half-closed eyelids. "Yes, that boy of yours is bad enough," said he, "but worse still, your horse is troll-scared." Seaman paused. "You're a fool," said he, so that it rang through the room, and Aslak drew his eyelids more closely than ever together. Seaman strode on again. Aslak sat still a while. "I tell you he is troll-scared," repeated he, and stole a glance after him to see what effect that had. "No, but he is wood-scared. That is what he is," said Seaman, moving on. "You fell a tree over him in the field, you careless slouch, and that is why no one can get him to pass there quietly any more." Aslak listened to this for a while. "Well, believe so if you choose. It is no disgrace to believe a thing. But I doubt if that will set your horses right again," he added, at the same time drawing himself farther back on the barrel and shading his face with one hand. Seaman came right over to him and said in a low but rather dismal tone, "You are a wicked—" "Seaman!" was heard from the hearth. It was Ingebjørg, his wife, who sat there hushing him as she had hushed the youngest child, who was frightened and had wanted to scream. The child had been quieted before, and now Seaman, too, was silent. But he stuck his fist, which was a very small one for such a square-built man, right up under Aslak's nose and held it there a while, as he bent forward and fairly scorched the boy's face with his eyes. Then he walked on as before, bestowing on him every now and then a hasty glance. Aslak was very pale, but he laughed over at Thorbjørn with one half of his face, while he kept the half turned towards Seaman very straight. "Lord grant us good patience," he exclaimed, after a little while. But at the same time he drew up his elbow, as though to ward off a blow. Seaman stopped suddenly, and shrieked at the top of his voice, as he brought his foot down on the floor, so that Aslak was completely silenced. "Do not you dare name him!" Ingeborg arose with the infant, and took Seaman gently by the arm. He did not look at her, but still he let his arm drop. She went to her seat. He walked to and fro once more, but neither said anything. As this lasted a while, Aslak had to break the silence again. "Aye, he has a great deal to do at Grand Lydon. That he has." "Seaman! Seaman!" whispered Ingeborg, but before the words reached him, Seaman had already rushed at Aslak, who thrust out his foot. It was pushed down, the fellow seized by it in his jacket collar, lifted up, and then set against the closed door with such violence that the panel gave way, and he went through it head foremost. The wife, Thorbjørn, and all the children screamed and begged for him, and the whole house was in one wail. But Seaman darted out after him, not remembering to open the door properly, but kicking the remaining aside, seized him again, carried him through the passage out into the yard, raised him high in the air, and flung him down again with all his might. And when Seaman perceived that there was too much snow for him to be hurt badly enough, he planted his knee on Aslak's breast and beat him right in the face, lifted him the third time, bore him to a place that was more free from snow, like a wolf that is dragging after him a dog he has been tearing to pieces, let him fall again, and this time more savagely than before, then sprang on him with his knees. And no one knows how it might have ended had not Ingeborg rushed between with the infant in her arms. "Do not bring ruin upon us!" she shrieked. A little while later, Ingeborg sat in the family room. Thorbjørn was dressing. The father was pacing the floor once more, and only paused now and then to drink a little water. But his hand shook so that the water flew over his head and splashed on the floor. Aslak did not come in, and presently Ingeborg made a movement to go out. "Stay in," said Semund, as though it were not to her he was speaking, and she stayed in. But a little later he went out himself. He did not come in again. Thorbjorn took his book and read incessantly, without looking up, although he did not understand a single sentence. A little later in the forenoon, the house was in the old order, although everyone had a feeling as though strangers had been visiting them. Thorbjorn ventured to go out, and the first person he met outside the door was Aslak, who had packed all his things on a sled. But the sled was Thorbjorn's. Thorbjorn stared at him, for he looked ugly. The blood had dried on his face, and was smeared all over. He coughed and clutched often at his breast. He looked for a moment silently at Thorbjorn, and then he burst out violently. "I do not like your eyes, boy!" With this he got astride of the sled, seated himself, and started down the hill. "You can get your sled back where you can find it," said he, and laughed as he turned once more and stuck out his tongue at him. Thus departed Aslak. But during the week that followed, the bailiff made his appearance at the house. The father was sometimes absent. The mother wept, and she also was away several times. "What is it, mother?" "Oh, Aslak is the cause of it all." One day they caught little Ingrid as she sat and sang, "Oh, blessed world, I am weary, now of thy doing so dreary. Once a girl puts foot inside, reason leaves the boy outright. Watery food the housewife makes, ease her lazy husband takes. Puss beyond the rest is keen and willy, for cream she's stealing so slyly." There was, of course, a query as to whom she could have learned this snatch of a song from. As was expected, it proved to be from Thorbjorn. He became much alarmed, and said he had learned it from Aslak. He was then made to understand that if he sang any more such verses himself, or taught them to his sister, he would get a whipping. Shortly after this, little Ingrid happened to swear. Thorbjorn was again called up, and Semund thought he might as well give him a taste of the rod now. But he cried and made such fair promises for himself that he was allowed to escape this time. The next Sunday there was service. His father said to him, "You will not have any chance to get into mischief at home today. You are going with me to church."